Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 103 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Mike Koomar is with me, and tonight, Mike, we are previewing the East region of the NCAA tournament, and there is nowhere else to start other than the team that is the number one seed, Duke. They'll be playing the winners of the play-in American and Mount St. Mary's. That's not the headline, Mike. The headline is that they'll be driving just a couple of miles down the road to
Miles.
Raleigh. So Duke, in this 116-8-9 pod, gets the one seed, and they get the Raleigh, North Carolina site. A lot of people are going to be picking Duke, not to just win a couple games, but to probably go to San Antonio.
Yeah, this kind of seems like the Duke Invitational in this side of the bracket. It's probably, in my opinion, the easiest of the four regions. On top of that, Duke is just a couple of miles from campus when they're going to be playing in Raleigh, and then they get to go play the regional in Newark, New Jersey, which is a huge stronghold for Duke fans. And they won't have a whole lot of other East Coast teams that they're playing against. Come to think of it, I think the only ones are Liberty and Virginia Commonwealth in that region. I don't think either of them are going to be playing against Duke. Neither of them have very big fan bases as well. So it will be a matter of when does Cooper Flag start to play for the Duke Blue Devils? If it's, I think they won't have any issues getting to the Sweet 16 without him. They were able to roll through the last couple of games with a little bit of some bumps against North Carolina, but they were still able to take care of business. And I don't think they would probably need him until the Sweet 16 until they play maybe Arizona or Oregon.
Yeah, and we're recording this video on Tuesday. Not entirely sure when it's going to drop, but we've kind of heard nothing in terms of Cooper Flag at this point. We heard a little bit at the ACC tournament. He was doing shoot around and minimal stuff. I think they're going to try and get him into at least one of the games this week just to see what he's got. Really, if he were to wait another week, like that's sort of 2 weeks without doing much, and be hard to potentially ramp it up there. Mike, the other game in this pod is definitely one of the most interesting games in this region. We've got the 8-seeded Mississippi State Bulldogs against your 9-seeded Baylor Bears. This is, pretty much 50-50 depending on who you listen to or look at. What are you looking for in Baylor's first matchup here?
The one thing that I'm concerned about as a Baylor fan is the size that Mississippi State is capable of putting into their lineup. They've got a couple of 6'10" forwards that they can match up, which is going to be a nightmare for Baylor. Look, Baylor definitely has the advantage in guard play in this game, and they've actually got a good amount of depth as long as Langston Love is playing. Still unsure if he'll be able to be going for the Bears. Would be a huge loss if not. But Norchad Omier staying out of foul trouble, being the only big that Baylor is really playing on a regular basis, and he's only 6'7". So that's going to be a tough matchup for the Bears. I actually like Mississippi State in this matchup. I'm going against my squad mostly because of the size. You have it's 6'10" Keyshawn Murphy, and you've got Cameron Matthews as well at 6'10". So you've got a couple of big guys from Mississippi State that could dominate Baylor, and that's why I'm going with the Bulldogs.
I think it's both teams are sort of not playing their best ball of the year coming in. Mississippi State has lost their last 6 games against tournament teams. They did have a couple wins against LSU in there. A couple of those losses were pretty lopsided. Others were closer. And then in terms of Baylor, Mike, they're probably, were able to knock off Kansas State in the Big 12 tournament, but they haven't performed very well against tournament quality teams recently either. So this will be one that I truly think could go either way. Josh Hubbard is the lead guard for Mississippi State. He's going to have to play up to the Baylor guards probably because the theme in these sorts of matchups is, teams have advantages in one place. It's what can they do in the place where they're disadvantaged. And I think Baylor's guards are going to be too much. Guards win games in this tournament, and I think Baylor will just get it. But Hubbard is fully capable of winning a game by himself. So I'm going to lean Baylor, but I could see it either way. And that pod will be in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is Friday, Sunday, I believe, Mike. Correct?
Yep.
Yep.
First couple games on Friday.
So we'll move down to the next pod. This one is all the way out in Seattle, Washington. We've got 4:13 Arizona and Akron. Tommy Lloyd and John Gross going at it here. And then the other the other matchup in the pod is Oregon against Liberty. So, Mike, two West Coast teams do get the Seattle pod here in the round of 64 and 32. Long way from Ohio, long way from Virginia. We'll start with Arizona and Akron first. The Zips are playing some really good ball coming in, but so is Arizona. Up and down season. But what are you looking for in this one to see? Can Arizona assert their authority and win this game handily, or do you think the Zips have got a trick up their sleeve?
Well, there's one thing about John Gross teams in general, and it's especially you've seen it a lot this year. This Akron team can score, and they score in bunches. They scored over 100 points in 3 league games this year, 6 total games this entire season. They've got one of the best rated offenses in college basketball. I don't love teams that win and die, though, offensively in March. And the reason is we've seen it with Kentucky time and time again. When you have an off night, the season's over. And Akron has not played as physical and as tough of a team as they have all year in Arizona. So I really like the Wildcats in this one, and I think they're going to end up rolling pretty easy. Look, Arizona has played pretty well. You look at their losses coming down the stretch. They lost to Brigham Young, which is one of the hottest teams in college basketball. They had won 9 straight games going into March, but then also you look at their one loss, and it was a pretty tight game against Houston. They played them pretty well all the way to the end, and Houston's one of these few teams that has a real good chance to win the national championship. So I actually like Arizona. They don't shoot the ball great, but they're going to match up defensively very well against Akron.
Yep. And when we look at these upset games, I usually go back to see what sort of teams Akron in this instance played in the non-conference. They played one at-large team, that was St. Mary's. They lost by 21.
Yeah.
They also played a couple other teams that got auto bids, like Omaha and Alabama State, and they beat Omaha by 8, and then Alabama State by 21. And then their December, they lost to Yale by 16. So against tournament quality, Mike, I don't see Akron really hanging.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe they can make
agree.
a ton of threes, a tough first half for Arizona, and they can find themselves up 3 or something, but Arizona's won a couple of ugly games this year, so if it comes to it, I still think they can do that.
And it's one of these weird things. Arizona actually wants an ugly game, right? Akron
Yeah,
does not
this
win an
year.
ugly game where they can't shoot. They're just not. So if it turns ugly, Arizona's going to win by 20 plus points.
And the other group in that pod was going to be Oregon against Liberty. Mike, Joe and I did talk a lot about Oregon yesterday, how they ended up at the 5. They had a great non-con, a really bad middle of the Big Ten. And then they won 7 games in a row going into the Big Ten tournament. And then it's Liberty from Conference USA, Richie McKay getting his guys to the dance. It's a long way from Virginia, and it's not all that far from Oregon. Oregon's already won a game in Seattle this year on the road against Washington in overtime. 5-12 is usually a big upset pick. Are you going with the Flames here?
I think the Flames have a really good opportunity. Look, Oregon did win 7 games coming down the stretch. Were any of them against tournament teams? No. The best team that they beat Indiana twice. That is a good win. But when you look at Liberty, they haven't played, the best Power Five conferences, but in the out of conference, they did have some good games. They played in the Philly 68 tip-off where they were victorious. Or actually, no, they lost. They lost to FAU, so they were third in that. But then they were able to beat Kansas State. They were able to beat McNeese State. McNeese State, we know, is a very good team that is a very popular upset pick here before they ran the table in Conference USA, win the overall and the conference championship. So I think they've got a chance. It really just comes down to which Oregon team comes out to play. If it's the team that we saw at the beginning of the conference season, Oregon's going to lose this one. But with that being said, I think Oregon does get a hard-fought victory over the Flames.
I'm going to go with Liberty, Mike.
Yeah.
They beat they beat McNeese, who's a fellow tournament team. They beat Kansas State. They beat Charleston in a true road game by quite a bit, and they were the best team in what ended up being like a sneaky solid Conference USA this year. I think probably the top three teams would have all been on this 12 line, depending on who won. But Oregon has very much relied on some late game shot making at times this year, and they very much switched their defense to a play style where fouls were not called as much or sporadically. And I think that like they get a couple quick whistles, they're going to kind of rethink their whole defensive philosophy because
Yeah.
they've kind of been at the mercy of a little bit of a referees who want to let things go. And the way that Liberty runs their offense is probably the cleanest, one of the cleanest X's and O movement stuff that we've seen. So I'm going to go with Liberty pulling off the upset.
I like it.
But
I
Mike, we're
like it.
halfway through this East region, so let's take a minute to remind everybody to please sign up for the ESPN Tournament Challenge group. There will be a link in the bio under this video, link in the bio on Instagram. It's free to play, and the winner will get a Sports Daily T-shirt. We did it for college football, and we're doing it for college basketball here. One entry, and make sure to get those in before Thursday at noon. All right, Mike, back down to Pod 3 here in the East. We're going to Denver, Colorado. Starting in the 6-11 game, it's BYU against VCU. Not a long trip for the Cougars, and quite a long trip for the VCU Rams, who did play on Sunday in the A10 championship game. And, of course, this is a Thursday-Saturday pod because of BYU. But, Mike, VCU coming in, playing pretty well. Their defense could certainly disrupt some teams, but BYU, one of the hottest teams in the country coming in. So what are you looking for in this one?
Yeah, this is, I think, on a neutral court, truly everything, all playing field is leveled. I think this is the best matchup of the East region in the first round. Two outstanding ball clubs going on. I think VCU got a little bit of disservice getting an 11 seed. And Ryan Odom, their coach, knows a thing or two about winning in March. He was victorious with UMBC and probably the biggest upset in NCAA tournament history against Virginia in 2019. So they know a thing or two about getting the job done. Um, Brigham Young, look at it like you said, Sean, one of the hottest teams in college basketball. They had a pretty tough ending to the Big 12 tournament. They got bounced pretty badly against Houston in the semifinals of that. But prior to that, 9 straight wins, and they kind of came out of nowhere. No one thought any expectations of Brigham Young early in February this year, but they've been able to do it, and they've got some depth, Sean. They typically play about 9 players a game. They can win offensive shootouts, but they can also defend the basketball pretty well. They can do a lot of things well, and they're going to have a huge advantage playing in altitude. Virginia Commonwealth, look, Atlantic 10 likes to play their championship game on Sunday. I disagree with it, and this is a lot of travel for a pretty quick turnaround. They're just playing on Thursday afternoon. So I think Virginia Commonwealth, they've got a great basketball team. They can win ugly. They're a very good defensive team, one of the better ones in the Atlantic 10. So I think this is going to be a really exciting matchup, but I think just with all the external factors, with it being a home game for Brigham Young essentially, and not having to worry about an altitude advantage and having more rest, I'm going with Cougars.
Yeah, VCU was one of those teams that, coming in before we saw the bracket, I probably wanted to advance a couple of rounds. And I think their defense is something that really could give some teams trouble.
Yeah,
They basically just force you to make one-on-one plays, and I think BYU is good enough to do that. It's BYU is not a good matchup for VCU, in my opinion. I thought VCU should have been a little higher. Them being on the 11 line signifies that they probably were not in the field had they lost that game to George Mason. But they do have some serious size, especially for a team outside the Power Five. They have some big guards, so maybe it is a good matchup for them because BYU have some, they have a 6'10" point guard, and then Reggie Saunders and Dallin Hall, and BYU have enough options where I think they should get over the line here, but VCU is good, and if they were playing any of the other 6 seeds, I'd probably pick them.
yeah, and VCU did get a little bit of a blueprint on how to beat Brigham Young on Saturday against Houston. Houston, obviously, probably a little bit more of a physical and athletic team than VCU, but if they're able to put pressure on these guards and they cannot shoot the three ball very well, they were just 6 for 28 on Saturday. If we can get some good defensive stops, if you're the VCU Rams and hold BYU shooting well, um, they're gonna have a really good chance to win this game.
I think
So there is absolutely a
VCU,
blueprint for
or yeah,
VCU to win. I just don't see it happening.
I think VCU, Mike, is a worse version of Houston. I think they try and do the same things.
Yeah.
They're not quite as blitz and disrupt as Houston and on defense, but their big guards will knock you off your spot, and I just don't think they're good enough to do that to a team like BYU. They were the best team in the A10 this year. They proved it. George Mason, pretty good team themselves too, but they got themselves across the line there. And the other matchup in this region, Mike, is another team that played on Sunday. That's Wisconsin. They lost the Big Ten championship game to Michigan. They still end up on the 3 line. They're going to play the Grizzlies from Montana. Mike, Wisconsin has, last year they weren't playing well going into the Big Ten tournament, won it, and then got bounced in the first round by James Madison. So hopefully they are trying to shake off the bad taste that the tournament left them last year. I think they should be able to get past Montana, but BYU is going to be a pretty popular pick to get to the Sweet 16.
Absolutely. I think Brigham Young would be my pick to get to the Sweet 16. But with that being said, I don't see Nebraska, or excuse me, Wisconsin struggling in the first round against Montana. Look, you look at the teams that Montana played that were quality opponents in the out of conference, and they got beat pretty bad. They lost to Oregon by a bunch, and then they also lost to Tennessee. Given Tennessee's one of the better teams in the country, but that was about a 45-point loss. So. I don't think they're going to struggle in this one, though. Could be tough, though, getting into that second round game against Brigham Young. I like the Cougars to roll.
And Montana, obviously significantly closer to Colorado than Wisconsin. Maybe there is a little bit of an altitude and legs situation. Wisconsin actually had to play 4 games in the Big Ten tournament. They were the 5 seed, and they were just totally shot by the end of that tournament. Yeah. And, 3 days of rest, one of which was probably traveling back to Madison. And then a few days later, they're going all the way to Denver. Like, I think there's a chance that their legs might not have recovered, but still, Wisconsin offensively is too good, I think, to let Montana hang around for more than, 3/4 of the game. It could be close at halftime, but I think Wisconsin will win there. But I think whoever wins out of the initial schools in the 6-11 might have a good chance to beat Wisconsin in that's just a 1 day of rest, 2 days after the first game. So we're going back down to the final pod here, Mike. St. Mary's and Vanderbilt and Alabama and Robert Morris from Cleveland, Ohio. The 7-10 matchup here should be one of the better contested games in this region. We got St. Mary's slight favorites, -4 right now, out of the West Coast Conference, the regular season champions. They did win both against Gonzaga in the regular season, lost the tournament championship game, and then Vanderbilt out of the SEC, the first team out of the last 4 in from the at-larges. So Mark Byington, year 1, a little bit of a hectic, up-tempo game they probably prefer versus the slow, grinded-out style of Randy Bennett and St. Mary's. So what are you looking for here?
This game is going to be all about tempo. Who can set the tempo early and often? The reason I give Vanderbilt the advantage in this game is just how battle-tested Vanderbilt is. They played in what this year was the best conference in college basketball. They played tournament teams every single game. Look, St. Mary's didn't. They had a great season. They only lost 1 game in conference. They beat Gonzaga twice. And I think if you're looking at that West Coast Conference Championship game, that was probably the worst game they played all season.
They made 2 threes.
I think that definitely has that Gale squad a little bit fired up to play in the tournament. But I just look at Vanderbilt playing more physical and probably being a little bit more athletic than St. Mary's and being a little bit more battle tested. That's why I think they're going to get the job done in the first round.
I'm leaning towards Vanderbilt too, Mike. I could see St. Mary's
winning.
It's a
toss-up, though.
But they kind of need to pitch a shutout in the way that they've got to keep control of the game for the entire game to win it. If you look at 1 or 2 Vanderbilt 7-0 runs, that might be enough to win the game. And better teams than St. Mary's have failed to do that at times this year. Vanderbilt is very fun to watch offensively. I don't know if their numbers are, conducive to like a super efficient offense, but they're going to get those possessions up. And beginning of the game is important here. St. Mary's goes up by 10. They might be able to hold on and run the clock out, but I think Vanderbilt is capable of one or two good runs in this game, and I think that's what it's going to take. And then Alabama and Robert Morris in the other game, Mike. Alabama, a little bit up and down. We're beaten pretty handily there by Florida in the semifinals of the SEC. But with how this draw has turned out for them, I actually give them a very large chance to get to at least the Elite Eight.
Yeah, I agree, Sean. I think they're going to be in the Elite Eight, and they're going to be playing Duke in Newark. They're a little bit inconsistent. Alabama's been coming down the stretch this year. Look, they have that win in overtime at Auburn, one of the signature ones of the entire year. But they followed that up by losing to Florida by 22 points in the semifinals. But they also, they were dominant against Kentucky. Were able to win that game by 29 points. So Alabama concerns me in a little bit in the way that I've talked about offensive teams in the big dance, where they kind of rely on a big shooting night in order to do that. And they're one of the best shooting teams in the country. But one bad game could cost them against Brigham Young or Wisconsin, whoever that might be. I don't think they're going to have any trouble getting to the Sweet 16. To make that very clear, I think they'll probably take on Brigham Young in the Sweet 16. That's my current picks. But watch out for if they get an off night shooting. We'll see what happens.
I think their B game is probably good enough to get to the Elite Eight, but they have had they've played a ton of games against good teams, so it's easy to say that they've had a wide range of results, but, the wide range of results might include a lower band of losses either in the Sweet 16 or round of 32, but I think they'll get to the Elite Eight. I hope we get to see it as college basketball fans. Because Duke has played Auburn, they beat Auburn. Alabama has beaten Auburn. At their best, these are the two of the 4 or 5 best teams in the sport. So, I hope we're going to see it, and I think we probably will. All right, Mike, that's it for the East region. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this video. If you have not watched the other regions yet, please check them out. We've got a couple of other videos coming up on the channel, and then by the time you see this, I think we might be a day away from round of 64 action. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.